Okay, we're back. And Nate, a very warm welcome from Colorado. I know it's the middle of the day with you, correct?
Yeah, it's about 1:30 in the afternoon here, but perfect timing.
Well, it's nearly midnight here. So, Nate, first of all, thank you so much for coming on. I know you're extremely busy and you're moving a lot as well. And also, I know myself and Andy were jealous looking at you because you're a little bit older, so I won't give away your age. You've written about your age, but you're in terrific shape, still doing great times all over. What I want to like your background is phenomenal of how you began as a kid swimming. You've won medals. You were ranked number 6 in triathletes in the world. um, I'm going to ask you the first question that is kind of sounds simple, it kind of sounds a bit silly, but what is doping?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those complex topics that when you try and boil it down, you're like, oh, it's easy to, and then when you actually have to say it, it's kind of tough. But doping effectively is the way I would define it is you're using artificial means to cheat and gain an unfair advantage over the competition. And the misconception a lot of people have is that doping, allows you to be lazy or does the work for you. All it does is it allow you to work harder more often and recover faster and prevent injury more often so that you accelerate your path to being a superstar athlete or, the best enhanced athlete that you can be. Nope, I think I lost your
I think you're muted, Alan.
I am muted. Sorry. Thank
there
you,
you go.
Andy. Thanks, guys. I was just listening to. I turned off my sound so I could just listen to you clear. Okay, what constitutes doping? What, like, for example, are painkillers or use of painkillers, is that doping?
It's interesting because you look at things like painkillers, which are available over the counter. You look at things like caffeine. People drink coffee or sports drinks that have caffeine in them and so forth. Those are legal substances up to a certain threshold. So, from my perspective, like every once in a while, I wake up and the workout from the previous day is making me really sore, so I might pop an Advil just to take the edge off. But it's not like I'm popping Advil all the time and things like that. So I think within the parameters of what's allowable, those substances are okay. But when you purposefully cross that threshold so that these everyday items can become performance enhancing or in some way allow you to push through certain barriers that you normally can't, that's when I think you are crossing the line and they become part of that doping definition.
Andy's going to come in a moment with a question. I know he has one to ask you. So today, for example, I play Gaelic football, and I'm getting on an age, so I should be like a bit more intelligent what I'm doing. But I end up like a couple of clashes where people ran into me, or ran into them, we ran into each other. So I got a bit sore. I know I'm going to be sore in the morning. I put a pepper patch on my back, so just to kind of just to keep the muscle, to keep it okay, keeps you flowing. At what point does it go from, okay, you do a workout, you take an Advil, sort of a painkiller the next day, just to sort of to move around, because regardless, where does it go then to where people can't work out without painkillers? And this isn't just like an opioid addiction thing. This is about basically where the person's leg is falling off. They can't move, that they do it. In that case, where it's controlled to sort of monitor this and to prevent sort of future, bodily and mental damage.
Sorry, who are you asking? Were you asking me or Andy?
That was for you. That was for you.
Oh, okay. It's a great question, and but I think what the broader question you're asking is where does the sort of self-medication kind of tip over into something that might be more structured, whether it's within a team or state-sponsored, what have you, and that access and that monitoring. So from my perspective, at the end of the day, it's all about optimizing performance to make the most money you can, or the team can, or, drawing the most fans to pack the stadiums, what have you. So at the end of the day, it's all about making money. And athletes, in that sort of case that you just talked about, Alan, athletes are the commodity, they're the product. So they're going to be used and abused and spit out the back when they can no longer fulfill their role, and they'll be replaced by somebody who can. This reminds me of a show I'm watching right now called The Boys. It's on Netflix, and it's a superhero show. It's really interesting. So you have these superheroes that are supposed to be really good people, and they all have different superpowers. They're actually owned by a corporation who then manages the PR and the product being the superheroes. And this corporation that owns them is owned by a larger pharmaceutical company who then has ties into the government. So think of that, and think of that then about your favorite sport, whether it's an athlete or a team, and how that cascades up to, say, the world governing body and WADA and the national anti-doping agencies. It's no different. Everybody has the vested interest in making sure the product is the best thing that's being put out there, because that's what the fans want to see. And what's unfortunate, back to your question, is that when athletes are abused in such a way that they're fed these pharmaceuticals that allow them just to get out of bed and sprint down the field or what have you, it's doing long-term damage that nobody necessarily cares about, because again, it's about today's product, not about what happens to these products once they're jettisoned and they're collecting dust on the shelf again. That's their problem. That's not our problem, and that's an unfortunate situation we're seeing a lot of athletes in. They're taking their lives, or they're collapsing mentally and or physically, because they abuse themselves and or have been abused for so long.
You've muted yourself again. I'm going to jump in while
Please.
Alan's quiet for once. So I have a layered question here. So the last time I ever really seriously went to the gym while doing sport on a daily basis would have been a good 20 odd years ago. But you kind of document that you had to change the system that you were doing to kind of keep you going and keep you at peak fitness. How did you go about actually finding the right balance of that? And I mean, is there a right level of pain? Is there a wrong level of pain that you should be going through before you go, no, this is too much?
Andy, I think that's a different question. I think that's a different topic you're discussing right now, but Nate, you can go ahead and answer anyway.
Okay, happy.
I'm asking for my back, not for anything else.
There's a couple things. One, there's discomfort and there's pain, and then there's what we define as pain that's associated with working hard, and there's pain that we define associated with, ooh, that's something bad. We inherently know the difference. So what the kind of advice I'd give you, and I'd love to have this conversation offline with you as well, just to give you deeper perspective. But I'm 53. It's okay, Alan. But back when I was in my teens, 20s, and 30s, I could run through a brick wall every day, dust myself off, and wake up and do it all over again. And the older I got, I kept trying to do that and realized I can't do that. But when I would try and ignore it, bad things would happen. I'd pull a hamstring, get a little tendonitis, pull a calf, whatever. And so I learned there's got to be a different balance of recovery versus pushing it. I can still push it, and I can still push it really hard. I just can't do it as often. And another shift I made is I've really dialed down the cardio and dialed up the strength training to where I'm doing that 3 to 4 days a week. Whereas before I might do it twice a week and then dial it back to 0 times a week when I was younger. So finding that right balance was actually a lot of trial and error, but I think that's part of it. It's like you can't be afraid to try new things, but you also have to tune in and listen, because your body's the smartest coach on the planet. that's bad, stop doing that, versus that's hard, but you know what? You can still make me do this because I know this is going to make me bigger, faster, stronger. But don't do this anymore, and I'm going to give you a sharp shooting pain to let you know you shouldn't do this anymore. But again, happy to answer any more questions you have, offline or what have you, and try and give you even more perspective if you think it would be helpful.
So Andy, just what Nate has explained, I'll just like clarify it, is that that sharp shooting pain is also known as a safe word. So now you understand it, like kind of sorry, in the best possible sense. Nate, before I want to got a few more minutes, and I want to ask. Well, I'm going to ask you about the Orion coaching system because of the way that you work with people and the better ways to work. Before we do, I know Peter P is waiting to come in for the quiz in a moment. As you know, well, you're just saying like we have very, very, I think quite sensible views about doping and so on. And when I started like digging into some of the old files and looking through them, thinking like, God, like why was this not being picked up on different issues? For example, just a small little graphic. This is back in 2016 it would have been. So we look at the amount of anti-doping, but the violations of people had failed. And it looks kind of okay. From all other countries, there's 819. So this is in a total of 1,595. Again, as I said, this is back, 2013. So in the total overall, 67%. I think, is this right? No, sorry, yeah, 67. Or no, my apologies. Yeah, so basically only 44% of all of these actually then went ahead as fails. And some of them, like 21 of these, like violations were committed by coaching staff. In that, Nate, how often do we see? And I'm delighted to speak with you as one clean coach to another clean coach. How often is it that the coaches are guilty, because you spoke with abuse of athletes, of abusing the trust of athletes and the trust of the competition and the fans most of all as well?
Yeah, so I'll speak generally because we have, sports where it's more individually based, and therefore, yes, there is some, athlete coach, dynamics. And then there's also team sports where you have a lot of athletes with one coach or a coaching staff. So there's a real broad range of what it means to be a coach or a facilitator, what have you. I think the prevalence of the powers that be, whether it's the coach, the manager, the owners, you name it, being complicit is much higher than people want to believe. And you think back to that example I gave with the Netflix series, The Boys. Like, think of that when you think of an athlete who is either suspected of or has been caught doping. So it's not a rogue athlete. It almost never is. If it's a rogue athlete, it's somebody who is on the outs because they aren't performing, and therefore they say, I have to find a way to elevate my game so I still have a job tomorrow. But if it's one of the stars, because if you think about it, doping is also an inverted pyramid. So you have a pyramid, which is as you get closer to the tip of the spear, you're becoming more and more elite. And it requires a lot more work to get there. Then you do this with the doping. And what I mean by that is pick a percent of athletes that you think is doping in a given sport. And at the top, that percentage is much higher. And it gets lower and lower as you get down in terms of skill and ability. And so at the top, like if you think, 30% are doping, well, at the top, it's probably closer to 100%. And then it gets lower and lower. And down here, it's closer to 0%. So it averages out to that 30%. The only way that happens is when the coaches are involved, the management is involved, and the facilitators go up above that to let them know it's a safe space to cheat. So I think coaches are absolutely, interwoven into this whole spider's web of cheating.
So basically, okay, so from what I can understand, what you said, it's actually it's a whole ecosystem.
Yep.
That basically, if you don't do it, you're off. Now, here, these are about samples that were collected. I'll just take off our stats for 2019. there's a disproportion here, as you see with cycling and athletics. Cycling, for better for worse, people say it's dirty, it's filthy. They're all doing it. Athletics, kind of the same. Swimming at 6% is the same. Football, quite high. That's now soccer. Football, that's quite high, 20%. But that's with the amount of players that are being there. We also know this is globally. This is from a Deutsche Welle investigation some years ago. That most of those samples were taken at lower leagues and even used in women's games as well. The testing at the top level, Champions League, for example, was I think it was a 1 in 1,000 chance that a footballer, will be tested in like if he played 10 years in Champions League, he'd have 1 in 1,000 chance of being tested, which is very, very low. Triathlon here, 3%. Sorry, Andy, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you then look at some of the biggest, most high-profile doping cases, like Nate was explaining, you look at the Dutch football team that got pinged, and it wasn't just 1 or 2 of them; it was 3 or 4 of them, plus the coaches that went down at the same time. So someone's pulled the string on a number of it, rather than, as Nate said, that rogue individual that's doing it by themselves.
No, but and this, this is exactly, you're dead right. Thank you for clarifying that, because it is. We saw with the Spanish Renaissance, shall we say, when in the late 2000s and early 2010s, they were absolutely unbelievable. They could run all day, run all night, and still be able to do a flamenco dance in the morning. They were flying, absolutely flying. And yet, it's been known about, like, with Operation Puerto, with Fuentes and so on, the doctors, the people working with the clubs. And as Fuentes says, the doctor said that, like, if he actually was allowed to release his information, because it's all buried, destroyed by the Spanish police and the Spanish anti-doping authorities, he said that Spain will be stripped of their World Cup title. So, there is that. Nate, on that, why are we so happy to kick the living daylights out of cycling or triathlon or athletics or bodybuilding or weightlifting? And yet, as we see from so many fans, football is clean. It's a skill game.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't have a really good answer, because that kind of speaks to who at the top is really pulling the strings and paying the bribes and lining the pockets of others who could influence that to make it more balanced across all these different sports. Another thing is that you talk to it, there's a 1 in 1,000 chance of getting caught. The catch rate is so small and kind of pathetic. It lets you know that the whole anti-doping system is effectively broken. So why wouldn't you do it? Plus, it's human nature. It's absolutely human nature to cheat. So again, when we think of cycling and we look at all the past dopers who are still in the system, and we think of all throughout the team structure, we have people who have been lifers and have had scandals within their teams, and they're still running those teams, like Quick Step. Then you got to think, like, and we're supposed to believe this new generation is 100% clean, when it's never been that way and never will be that way, not just within cycling, but within sport with a capital S in general. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's
no. It's again, it's I'm all for giving people a second chance. I'm all for giving, like, we've all had to ask for a second chance or to try and not make a mistake. And we've seen people, and we can name them, who are in charge of cycling squads, like Jonathan Wouters, who had himself, he admitted, he was open and said, like, we're going to make a clean team.
Don't get me started on JV. Don't get me started.
No, look, we both know that the story is all okay on that. Before we go out, Nate, I want to ask you, with your coaching system, why should people contact you? Like, so this is a sales pitch, because what you do and how you've already explained to Andy how to better do things. Why should people go to you? What gives you the edge? Apart from leaving people healthy, happy, and more sociable after your system, why should they pick you as the training guru?
No, I appreciate the question. First of all, there's no perfect coach. There's no perfect system. Um, and part of what rankles me, and then I'll answer your question. Part of what rankles me is there's a lot of people, a lot of coaches who are talking about like all these eureka moments they're having, and more data, more data, more data. And I've asked some of them point blank, you have all this extra data. What do you do with it? How have you quantified that it's actually making improvements over what you used to do? And I don't get one answer, which tells me they have no clue. They just think more data is a better offering, and it's not. Where I tend to do it a little different is one couple ways. One, I'm my own guinea pig, so I try it on myself before I then open it up to others. Because if it works for me, there's a chance it's going to work for you. It could work for you better or not as great, but you're not going to like fall off a cliff. So that's the first thing. I eat my own dog food, as the saying goes. Secondly, um, I look at the premise on which a lot of coaching plans and programs are based, and it's fallible data. For example, one thing is like the watt-based FTP, functional threshold power. To get to your FTP, it's fraught with assumptions, and it's highly inaccurate. It's been proven over and over to be inaccurate, yet that is the gold standard. Why is that the gold standard? It shouldn't be. So I try other things and find something that is actually more accurate and therefore I think better. So the foundation of the program is going to be better. And thirdly, I also admit that I don't know everything. And I also admit that everything that we're hearing about is a reskin of everything that's already come before us. There is no innovation left. It's like reverse periodization has been tried decades ago and 4 decades. So, what you'll get from me is very real, and you'll get something that's realistic to use and to leverage. I'm not here to drive you into the ground. I'm here to have your athletics be a complement to what's more important in life: your relationships, your health, your mental stability, and other things. And so, this isn't about a sport or performance becoming your life. It's how do you fit this into a bigger picture so that you become more fulfilled as an individual. And oh, by the way, there's been some fantastic results out there. So at the same time, I've had athletes who have set course records, world records, what have you. And after a year, they're like, hey, that was fantastic. Thanks. I'm now going in this direction. That's fine. And I've had others that I've worked with for 20 years and everything in between. So, I'm old enough where I also don't put my ego into it. I try and put the athlete's, ego into it, if that makes sense. So that's why I'd answer that. It's a complementary approach to what your entire life situation looks like, so that we maximize what you want to get out of your physical pursuits. It's really that simple.
I think they go for it as holistic as well, because as you're looking at the person and then the athlete and then the athlete and person together. So I think it's excellent. We're going to have to wrap up the moment. Of course, we can't get Peter P in, so we're not going to do the big faculty quiz today, but just with some problems with Peter hearing us and linking up with us. Andy Mack, do you have any final question for Nate before you go away?
How do you heal a herniated disc?
I wish I knew. The short answer is I don't know how. The longer answer is it would depend on which disc is herniated, and is it simply a matter of strengthening the area around it in a way that allows it to heal, but you're giving it the support around it, or is it something that is like, so it's like, what's the degree of herniation? I've helped a couple of athletes through that. I've also tried with others and I've failed miserably, and then they've had to have surgery, not because of me, simply because it was beyond my limited ability in that capacity to help them. this is going to be like a loaded suggestion, but it could even be something like a cortisone shot, and that's like a dirty word here, and I get that, but it could reduce the inflammation enough where that herniated disc actually doesn't get negatively impacted. It actually gets helped. So I would absolutely suggest contacting an expert in the field, not just a general practitioner or something like that. An expert in the field who has that depth of knowledge about herniated discs and go there. But that said, from a physical perspective, it would be what can you do that strengthens around that area without causing a zinger? Do more of that. And then if something causes a zinger, do less of that. Again, the body will be your coach through that. So that would be like the extent of the advice I might be able to give you on that.
I think it's a huge amount of advice, and you're very lucky. Nate, where can people find out more about Orion Coaching Systems? What's the website address?
Yeah, so it's oriontrainingsystems.com. And there's also Orion Coaching on Twitter. So it's the only social channel I use. But oriontrainingsystems.com, and you can fill out a form there if you have any questions, or you can certainly reach me via Twitter. Either one works just fine by me.
That's